The tires of the black Mercedes crunched softly over the gravel driveway of the Langston estate. Folk curled at the edges of the wrought iron gates like old secrets whispering through the air. Towering sycamores framed the house, stoic, unmoved, watching. Graham Langston stared through the windshield in silence. "This is quaint," Celeste murmured beside him. Her manicured finger traced the window pane, eyes fixed on the ivy-dripped facade of the mansion. He smiled politely, but didn't reply. The estate hadn't changed. Same aging stone walls, same stiff hedges trimmed with military precision, same air of inherited pride so thick you could taste it. Graham had left 10 years ago to build an empire of algorithms and glass towers. Now he was back, married, successful, and unsettled. The front door swung open before the engine cut. Alma stood there, hands folded neatly in front of her waist, her silver hair tucked into a tidy bun. She wore the same pale blue apron she'd worn the day his mother died. A quiet warmth bloomed in Graham's chest at the sight of her. "Master Graham," she said, voice as steady as ever. He stepped out and crossed to her, hugging her tightly. "You're not supposed to call me that anymore," he said, voice low. "You'll always be Master Graham to me," she whispered. Celeste lingered behind. Adjusting her sunglasses despite the overcast sky, Alma turned to her. "You must be Mrs. Langston. Welcome home." Celeste offered a cool smile. "Thank you. It's bigger than I imagined." Alma's eyes didn't flinch. It tends to grow on people. Inside, the house seemed to inhale their presence. The long hallway smelled faintly of lemon oil and old wood. Portraits of long-dead Langstons lined the walls, their eyes heavy with judgment and legacy. Graham's footsteps slowed as he passed his father's painting stern, dignified, impossible to live up to. "This place needs modern lighting," Celeste said, glancing up at the crystal chandelier above the grand staircase. "It's like walking into a museum." Alma's expression didn't change, but her fingers twitched ever so slightly. Graham offered no defense. He knew better. Celeste was always polite in the way a scalpel was precise. Later that afternoon, while Graham wandered through the conservatory, Alma quietly prepared the sitting room for tea. Celeste entered, examining the room like a critic appraising a set piece. "Is that tea from the estate's own supply?" she asked, eyeing the porcelain. Alma gave a polite nod. "Earl Grey, Mr. Langston's favorite." "My husband," Celeste replied, with a half-smile, "prefers sencha." There was no correction in Alma's voice, only grace. "I'll prepare some." When she left, Celeste looked toward the family photo on the mantel, one of Graham, age 6, sitting on Alma's lap, with 2 fingers. She turned it face down. That evening, the house was dim with gold-toned lamplight. Graham sat in the library, thumbing through an old book of pressed flowers his mother once made. Alma entered to say dinner was ready. "Did you ever think I'd come back?" he asked her. Alma took a moment before answering, "Not with someone like her." He chuckled. "You don't approve." "I don't need to approve," she said, "but she'll have to learn this house runs on more than money." He nodded, but didn't commit. Alma gave him one last look, then left. Outside, footsteps echoed from the corridor Celeste's heels. Graham closed the book and stood. As the family gathered in the dining hall, conversation buzzed softly around the long oak table. Celeste, ever the social tactician, charmed Uncle Desmond with stories of gallery openings and European wine auctions. Graham stayed quiet, eyes often drifting to Alma, who moved silently between guests like a ghost who never quite left. At one point, Celeste leaned over to Graham and whispered, "She's still working, isn't she? Like 100. "She's 68, he replied under his breath. "She raised me." Celeste gave a faint smirk. "I had a nanny too. I didn't invite her to dinner." Graham said nothing, but Alma, standing just behind them with a tray, had heard every word. Lead into chapter 2. And so the house old noble and watching waited, as Celeste planted her seeds of control, as Graham chose silence over confrontation, and as Alma moved with dignity through rising shadows, the tension began to quietly take root. Next, Chapter 2, Cold Hospitality, where small humiliations pile like dust in corners, unnoticed by those who think they're above it all, until one moment becomes impossible to ignore. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains like soft breath on glass, gentle but cool. Outside, the garden shimmered with dew, but inside the Langston estate, the chill in the air had nothing to do with weather. Graham sat alone at the breakfast table, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly across from him. The place set for Celeste remained untouched. The silver spoon beside it gleamed under the chandelier, perfectly aligned like everything in this house, a ritual of order. Alma moved with her usual quiet rhythm, setting down a bowl of fresh berries and folded linen napkins. She was graceful, composed, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. But Graham noticed. "You didn't have to make all this," he said softly, gesturing to the spread. Alma gave a small nod, folding her hands. "You always skipped breakfast as a boy. Thought you might do better with a full table." Graham smiled faintly. "I still don't eat until noon." "You still need it." Their eyes met, just for a moment. No more needed to be said. Celeste entered like a shift in temperature. Silk robe cinched tight, hair loosely coiled. She looked like a magazine spread come to life, refined, controlled, curated. "Good morning," she sang, and air kissed Graham on the cheek. Her eyes flicked to Alma. "You're still making breakfast. Isn't there a cook?" "There is," Alma replied, "but I enjoy the mornings." Celeste slid into her seat, lifting the teapot, Earl Grey again. Alma opened her mouth to offer an alternative, but Celeste waved her off. "Never mind, I'll have something later." She didn't touch the cup, didn't touch the berries, just leaned back, letting the room bend around her presence. Later that morning, Alma was tending to the upstairs corridor, a narrow space lined with framed photographs, each telling stories of christenings, weddings, and homecomings. She paused to dust a black and white photo of young Graham, smiling wide with missing teeth, clutching a model airplane. Behind her, a sound heals, measured, deliberate. "Celeste." "I've been meaning to ask," Celeste said, arms crossed. "How long do you plan to keep working?" Alma turned, unbothered, "Until I'm no longer needed." "Right." Celeste's eyes scanned the photos, "because at some point, tradition has to make room for progress." She plucked a silver-framed image of Graham's parents on their wedding day. All this nostalgia. It's lovely, but it's exhausting. We'll modernize the West Wing. Maybe convert it into a media space. Guests need somewhere vibrant to relax. Alma's voice was soft. "This house remembers more than you think." "Memories don't pay property taxes," Celeste snapped, setting the photo down just off center. She walked away, leaving the frame crooked on the shelf. That afternoon, Graham wandered into the parlor and found Alma adjusting cushions. "She doesn't mean harm," he offered. Alma didn't turn. "Harm doesn't require intent." He hesitated. "She just sees things differently." "She doesn't see me at all." That landed heavy. Graham exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You should say something," Alma added gently. "She's not cruel," he said, "just strong-willed." "And so are you." "Graham," Alma said, "you just forgot how to use it." The small moments piled up like quiet snowdrifts. Celeste reorganized the china cabinet without asking, muttering that white porcelain is far too dated. She dismissed Alma in front of a delivery man. "Oh, she's just a housekeeper." She called Clara's bookshelf provincial. She replaced the antique doormat with a monogrammed rug that read L for Langston. Clara rolled her eyes, as if she owns the letter. In hushed tones over wine, the cousins began to talk, words like cold, pretentious, and soulless whispered through drawing rooms like drafts through cracked windows. Graham remained silent, still watching, still undecided. That night, Alma entered the music room to find the grand piano slightly turned away from its usual position, angled just enough to break tradition. A vase of lilies sat on top, blocking the sheet music stand. She didn't touch it, just stood there. The music was gone. Lead into Chapter 3. The house had changed. Subtly, but undeniably. It no longer felt like it belonged to its past or its future, and as one woman claimed space with silence, another was being pushed out of the frame altogether. Next, Chapter 3. The setup. When old rituals are twisted and dignity becomes a target. One quiet moment will tip the balance, and everyone in the Langston household will feel the consequences. The Langston dining hall was dressed for theater. Crystal glasses lined the table like glinting soldiers. Polished silverware gleamed beneath the soft flicker of candlelight, and the scent of rosemary and lemon zest drifted from the kitchen like a whispered promise. Outside, dusk clung to the windows, blue-gray and silent, as if the night was holding its breath. Tonight was the gathering. Every year, the Langstons hosted a formal dinner for extended family, a tradition as tightly stitched into the fabric of the estate as its time-worn Persian rugs. Only this year, there was a new hostess. Celeste Langston. She stood at the head of the long table in a dark emerald gown that hugged her figure like it had been sewn by a secret. Her hair was pinned back in soft waves, and a diamond teardrop pendant shimmered at her throat. She looked like royalty. Cold, exacting royalty. "This layout is wrong," she said to Alma, gesturing to the floral centerpiece. "Hydrangeas seg. We'll use peonies next time. Also, these candles are too short. They should sit at least 3 inches above eye level. It's a symmetry issue." Alma, who had arranged the table the same way for 30 years, didn't flinch. "Of course, Mrs. Langston." "And I'd like you to serve the wine tonight," Celeste added with a tight smile. Alma paused. Her hands rested lightly on the back of a dining chair. "I can ask James to handle the pours." "No," Celeste said, her tone wrapped in silk and steel. "This evening is important. The guests expect to be served by someone familiar." Alma nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." From the doorway, Graham watched, silent again. The tension moved around him like smoke, visible, bitter, and hard to breathe. As the guests arrived, coats were taken, champagne was poured, and laughter began to fill the hall. Clara wore a velvet black dress and a look of knowing restraint. Uncle Desmond brought a guest who spoke loudly about European markets. Cousin Olivia arrived late, trailing perfume and stories from Paris. Everyone looked the part. No one felt it. At the table, Graham sat to the right of Celeste. Alma stood poised near the bar cart, hands steady, eyes alert. The evening moved in smooth rhythms. At first, wine glasses clinked. Conversations circled around art, investments, and travel. But beneath it all was the quiet hum of something off-key. Then came the moment. Celeste turned toward Alma with a smile too sweet. "Would you pour the siren now? I've been waiting to try that one all evening." Alma approached, lifting the bottle with practiced care. She made her way around the table, filling glasses with precise restraint. When she reached Celeste, she leaned gently forward, tilting the bottle. And in that instant, perhaps because the bottle's neck caught on the rim of the crystal, or maybe because hands that had spent a lifetime steadying others were finally tired, the wine slipped. A thick stream of the deep red splashed across Celeste's dress. Time froze. There was a sharp intake of breath. Forks clinked against plates. Even the chandelier seemed to tremble. Celeste stood slowly. Her gaze dropped to the fabric now soaking up the wine like a wound. Her jaw set. "Oh," she said lightly, her voice brittle, "I suppose we can't expect everyone to age gracefully." Alma's face remained calm, pale, but calm. Graham half rose from his chair, but Celeste's voice sliced the space before he could speak. "You've done enough," she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Why don't you let the staff handle things from here?" The word staff landed like a slap. Alma straightened. Her eyes flicked to Graham just for a second. He didn't meet them. She nodded once. "As you wish, ma'am." And she walked away. Clara broke the silence. "I think I've lost my appetite." No one else spoke. No one else moved. Even the wine, dark as blood, kept bleeding into the velvet folds of Celeste's dress. Lead into chapter 4, but some stains don't wash out. Not from fabric, not from memory. And as Alma disappeared into the dark hallway beyond the dining room, the house held its breath, waiting to see if anyone would finally speak the truth. Next, chapter 4, Echoes in Empty Rooms. When silence says too much and the ghosts of gratitude come knocking, the weight of inaction will come to collect. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway like soft accusations. Alma's shoes clicked against the marble as she moved with quiet dignity away from the dining hall, away from the laughter that had curdled into awkward silence behind her. The door clicked shut, muffling the polished performance of the dinner party. She didn't cry. In the west wing, past the guest bedrooms and antique wardrobes, was her small room, barely more than a square with soft lighting, a single armchair, and a small cross above the bed. There was no grandeur here, just peace. But tonight, even that peace felt borrowed. She opened the closet, removed a small suitcase from the top shelf, and set it gently on the bed. Downstairs, the wine had been wiped up, the party was dissolving, and Celeste, now in a fresh change of clothes, mingled with guests as if nothing had happened. Her voice had regained its usual lilt, praising the dessert course and complimenting Olivia's earrings. Graham sat stiffly in his chair, staring at the grain of the table every now and then. A fork scraped against the plate, and the sound made him flinch. Clara watched him. She'd seen it all, every second of his hesitation, every word he hadn't spoken. "You're quiet," she said softly. She embarrassed herself. He muttered. "No," Clara said, her voice sharpening. "You embarrassed her. And yourself." Graham looked up. "She poured wine for this family for 3 decades, Clara continued. "She cooked when we were sick. She cleaned after our father's tantrums. She held you when Mom died." He closed his eyes. "Don't do this now." "No, if not now, when?" Later that night, the house slept, at least. Most of it did. Graham stood in the hallway outside Alma's room. He didn't knock right away. Instead, he stared at the faint glow of her lamp spilling out from under the door. He finally tapped twice. "Come in," she said, already knowing who it would be. He stepped inside. She was sitting in the armchair, her suitcase open beside her. Her hands were folded in her lap, calm. Not cold, never cold, but with the distant stillness of someone who had already said goodbye in her heart. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Alma nodded. "I know. I should have said something." "Yes, you should have." Her answer was simple, not meant to punish, just the truth, handed over like a folded sheet. "I let her humiliate you." Alma finally looked up. Her eyes weren't wet, but they shimmered. "You didn't let her. Graham. You joined her. By doing nothing." He stepped closer. "I didn't mean." "It doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what you did." Silence stretched between them, thick and bitter. "I thought if I said nothing, it would pass," he said. Alma's voice was gentle now. "You've always been kind, Graham. But kindness without courage is just decoration." That hit him like a slap, because it was true. She glanced down at her suitcase. "I'm not leaving angry. I'm leaving tired. I've given this house everything, and tonight it told me I don't belong anymore." Graham sat down on the edge of her bed. He felt like a child again, small, ashamed, powerless. Can I change your mind? Alma smiled faintly. Not tonight. In the hallway, Clara leaned against the wall, listening. Uncle Desmond appeared beside her with a mug of tea and a heavy sigh. He's going to have to learn the hard way, Clara said. Desmond nodded. The Langstons always do. She looked over at him. Did you? He sipped the tea. Eventually. The house creaked that night, not from wind, but from memory. A photo on the wall tilted slightly, as if even the walls themselves were unsettled. Somewhere in the distance, a piano key echoed unplayed but not forgotten. Lead into chapter 5, and as morning threatened to arrive. One truth remained: sometimes the loudest sounds are the ones left unsaid. But in the cold light of the next day, someone would have to speak, and not just with words. Next, chapter 5. The matriarch's chair. When honor is reclaimed and silence is shattered, the house will see who truly belongs and who never did. Morning arrived, not with sunlight, but with the muted gray of a sky too burdened to break. The Langston estate woke slowly. Dim lights flickered on in hallways. Distant clinks of dishes echoed through the kitchen, and the scent of coffee crept through the corridors like a gentle prod to the soul. But in Alma's room, there was no coffee, no warm bread, only her suitcase zipped and standing by the door, like a final punctuation mark. She sat in silence, hands folded in her lap, staring at the little photograph on her nightstand. Graham, no older than 7, missing 2 teeth, his arm wrapped tight around her waist. She touched the frame once, then left it behind. Downstairs, the Langston family had gathered again in the parlor, the morning sun casting dull shadows across antique floors. It was supposed to be a farewell brunch. Croissants sat untouched, china cups steamed silently. A soft chatter floated in the air, detached, performative, like the family was rehearsing the role of concerned relatives for a show that no one really wanted to direct. Celeste, wearing pale lavender and pearls, was pouring herself a mimosa. It's such a shame, really. She could have retired years ago, but some people don't know when to let go. Graham stood in the corner, jaw tight, hands in his pockets. His gaze drifted not to the window, not to the door, but to the one chair that sat at the far end of the room. The matriarch's chair. Heavy, carved oak, lined with rose velvet. It had belonged to his grandmother, then sat empty for years, reserved only for those whose presence commanded more than attention. No one had dared to sit in it, not since Alma stopped setting a place for it. Until now. The door creaked open. Alma stepped into the parlor, her coat draped over one arm, suitcase in the other. Her face was calm, her steps slow. The room quieted around her like water parting around a stone. She nodded once. I'm ready. She didn't expect a speech, didn't need one. But Graham stepped forward, and this time he didn't stop. He crossed the room in silence, the hardwood groaning beneath his shoes. He reached the matriarch's chair and turned to face them all: his wife, his cousins, his uncles, and his sister, the same people who had watched him freeze the night before. He didn't speak loudly, but the words fell with weight. This house was built on the backs of people who showed up when no one else did. He looked at Alma. She showed up for me, for all of us. When we were sick, when we were lost, when this family forgot how to love each other. Celeste laughed lightly. Graham. No. His voice cut through the air, sharp as glass. You don't get to speak right now. The silence that followed was deafening. He turned to Alma. I never gave you the honor you deserve, but I can now. He reached for the arm of the matriarch's chair, and with a gesture that echoed years of reverence, he pulled it back and motioned gently. Please, he said, sit. Alma didn't move at first. Her eyes were glassy, her lips trembling. She had never been one to seek recognition, but in that moment, something shifted, not in her, but in the room. She stepped forward, and slowly, quietly, she sat. It was as if the house itself exhaled. The floor settled. The chandelier above seemed to glow just a little warmer. The portraits on the wall didn't look quite so stern. Alma folded her hands in her lap. She looked at Graham. "Thank you." "No," he said, "thank you." Celeste's mouth tightened. She set down her glass a little too hard. "I didn't realize we were rewriting the rules of inheritance with breakfast." Graham looked at her, but there was no venom in his tone, just finality. "You married into this family, Celeste, but she made it one." She scoffed. "So what now? She runs the estate." "No," Clara interjected, standing, "but she won't be erased from it." The others murmured agreement. Uncle Desmond offered a nod, proud and slow. Celeste looked around, as if seeing the room for the first time and realizing it no longer revolved around her. She picked up her clutch, straightened her shoulders, and walked out without another word. The family stayed. The table was reset, plates passed. Alma remained at the head, not giving orders, not hosting, but simply present. For once, she was the honored guest. And Graham. He smiled more that morning than he had in years, not because everything was fixed, but because something had been restored. Lead into chapter 6. But even after a chair is claimed, the question remains what comes next. When the dust settles and the echoes fade, can the house truly change, or does it still carry the scars of silence? Next, chapter 6, Aftershocks. Where relationships are tested, pride confronts regret, and the question of legacy moves from furniture to the heart. The storm, when it finally passed, left behind a stillness that was neither peace nor closure, just the echo of something broken, and the strange quiet that comes after someone finally tells the truth. The Langston estate had never felt more alive. That morning, laughter returned to the breakfast table, light and cautious, like a violin tuning after years of silence. Alma didn't cook, didn't serve. She sat, not at the head anymore, but beside Graham, sipping tea Clara had made, wearing a navy shawl Clara had wrapped around her shoulders. James, the junior butler, moved quietly through the room, a little stunned, perhaps by the shift in the house's gravity. Celeste was not present. Her absence did not need explanation. It was felt in the empty chair beside Graham, in the untouched mimosa glass, in the way the servants no longer looked toward her for direction. She had not returned to the estate since the confrontation. Instead, she had left a brief message through the family secretary. "Taking some time in the city. Need space. Please forward mail to my Manhattan address." No apology, no conversation, just absence. Later that day, Graham stood in the conservatory, staring out through the glass wall at the rose garden Alma used to prune each spring. He heard the soft shuffle of feet behind him before Alma spoke. "She's not coming back, is she?" Graham took a breath. "I don't know." "You still love her?" He turned. "I love the idea of her. The woman I thought she might become, the one I hoped I could build something real with." Alma walked closer, her gaze gentle. Love built on hope alone is like building a house on fog. Looks solid until you step inside. He smiled sadly. "You always know what to say." "That's because I've watched this family long enough to know how it repeats itself. Strong men, silent hearts, and women with louder voices than love." In the afternoon, Clara found Graham in the old study where his father used to read, drink, and pretend to rule a world slipping from his grasp. Dust had gathered on the bookshelves. The curtains were pulled halfway. It smelled faintly of old bourbon and paper. She dropped onto the sofa. "So, that happened." Graham smirked. "Yeah. I never thought you'd actually pull out the chair." "Neither did I." "You did the right thing, you know." "I know. He said, "I just don't know what to do with all this right now." She looked around the room. Maybe let the silence be useful for once. Let it teach us. By nightfall, the house had settled into a new rhythm. There was less tension in the halls, less stiffness in the servants' movements. Alma helped James prepare a late dinner, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. At the long table, the family ate simply, no fanfare, no performance. Graham sat across from Alma, watching her explain to James how to use the estate's old herb press. "You should have taken more credit for the kitchen," he said, half laughing. "I was never interested in credit," Alma replied, "just care." Upstairs, Graham entered the master bedroom. The bed was made with clinical perfection, too neat, too cold. On the vanity sat a jewelry box. The lid was open. Inside, her diamond pendant was gone. He sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the space where Celeste's robe once hung. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel rage. He felt a strange, hollow clarity. Their marriage had been a beautiful room, elegant, structured, full of curated details, but like the Langston estate before Alma, it had lacked warmth. It had lacked someone to keep the lights on after the guest left. And that, in the end, had made all the difference. Lead into Chapter 7. But even after the storm clears, there's still debris to sweep, roots to tend, and roots to plant in new soil. What remains must now grow into something better, or risk crumbling all over again. Next chapter, 7. Restoration. When forgiveness, tradition, and future collide, what do we preserve? And what do we finally let go? The wind over the Langston cliffs carried the scent of salt and new beginnings. It was early evening. The sun hung low, casting a golden sheen across the estate's weathered stone walls from the garden. The roses bloomed again, modest, untrimmed, but alive. No one had instructed the gardener to return them to form. No one needed to. Some things were better left natural. Inside, the estate felt lighter. Furniture had been moved not out of rebellion, but out of intention. Clara had replaced the stiff brocade curtains in the drawing room with soft linen. The old piano had been dusted and left open, the keys exposed like a wound, learning how to breathe again. In the west corridor, a photo of Alma and young Graham had been reframed. This time, it was centered, polished, respected. On the front porch, Graham and Alma sat in silence, watching the horizon melt into the sea. No words, no explanations, just the comfort of presence. She sipped a warm cup of chamomile. "You know," Graham began, "I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't stood up." Alma didn't look at him, just exhaled. "You'd still be you," she said softly. "Just a version of yourself you wouldn't be proud of." He smiled, faintly. "I think I'm finally starting to understand what this house means." "What it meant," she corrected. "You get to decide what it becomes." A gull cried in the distance, and the wind shifted just enough to stir the trees. Later, Clara joined them with a small notebook in her hand. "I've been writing down some ideas. I think we should open the estate for seasonal retreats. Nothing flashy, just honest, quiet, local." Graham raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "People don't want curated perfection anymore. They want real stories, real places. Alma can even teach a cooking workshop." Alma chuckled. "Only if James stops burning garlic." Clara grinned. "Deal." There was laughter, light, honest, unforced. Inside, changes continued. Alma's room was moved closer to the family wing. Her name added officially to the household ledger under a new title, House Steward Emeritus. Graham insisted she never lift another box again, though she still snuck into the kitchen when she thought no one was looking. As for Celeste, weeks passed without word. A single letter arrived, typed and cold. "I believe our paths have diverged. No ill will, simply different foundations." It was signed simply, C. Graham folded the letter once and set it in the fireplace. He didn't need fire to destroy it. He just needed to let it go. One morning, Alma found him in the garden, kneeling in dirt, trying to plant rose bushes with comically oversized gloves. "You're digging too close," she said, laughing. "They'll choke each other." "Story of my life," he muttered. She knelt beside him. "Start over. Make space. Let them breathe." He looked at her and nodded. "Like we did." "Exactly." They worked in silence, side by side, in the rich earth that had seen generations rise, fall, and return home in new forms. That evening, a new portrait was hung above the library fireplace. Not a noble ancestor, not a patriarch. It was a candid black and white of Alma in the garden, hair windblown, laughing, unaware the photo had been taken. No plaque, no date, just truth. As the last of the day disappeared beyond the sea, Graham stood once more in the grand hallway of the estate, listening. There were no footsteps of judgment, no whispers of old ghosts, only the quiet hum of something restored. A house that remembered how to feel like home. Final reflection. Sometimes, the legacy we inherit isn't a matter of walls or wealth, it's the people who held us upright when everything else fell down. And when we finally find the courage to honor that, the foundation becomes unshakable.